Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Service Commission. It is Tuesday, August 30th at 12:31 p.m. We are here for an interview related to docket number 2022-105-E in response to a request for proposals that the Commission issued for a consultant or expert to assist in the 2023 Integrated Resource Plan to be filed by South Carolina Public Service Authority, also known as Santee Cooper. And at this time, we are here to hear from PA Consulting. And we have with us in the hearing room Mr. Charles Janicek and Ms. Sarah Bilbao. Thank you. And we need to take a roll call of commissioners. I'm getting everybody pointing at me to make sure we've got all the commissioners in-house. And let's see if we could show. There we go. Virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Thomason present in the hearing room. We have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Welcome to PA Consulting. Any preliminary matters before we begin? Who's going to kick us off?
I can do that.
Please identify.
I'm Charles Janicek with PA Consulting. I'm here with my colleague Sarah Bilbao, and virtually on the phone we have Mr. Jim Heidel, Mr. Matt Morin, Mr. Martin Skapanik, and Mr. Suman Gautam.
Okay. Do you have any preliminary statement you'd like to make before we begin? Or?
I do. Thank you very much for having us for this interview. We're excited to speak with you all and looking forward to the prospect of conducting this review of Santee Cooper's IRP, their pending IRP.
I'm going to ask you to pull that microphone a little bit closer so we can be sure to hear you.
Sure.
Thank you.
As I said, we're excited to be here and to talk about this review. We understand it's the first review, the first time that the commissioner has reviewed a Santee Cooper IRP. As a way of introduction to PA Consulting, we are a global consulting firm of about 3,000 people. We cover a number of sectors, including energy, transportation, healthcare, and life sciences. And in the energy area, we have about 300 people globally supporting our energy services. Of that, a number of them are focused on utility operations and utility digital operations, as well as transmission and distribution operations. Here in our group, the group that would support this work, we have about 100 people focused on energy markets and the intersection of utilities and the energy markets writ large, if that makes sense. We cover a number of different types of disciplines, including integrated resource planning, and rate design, and a number of other areas. We sort of view the energy industry, and when we're advising utilities and market participants and regulators, we view it through the sort of three long-term uncertainty lenses that we consider, which are policy uncertainty, technology uncertainty, and market uncertainty. And by that I mean that it's really difficult. Nobody has a true perfect crystal ball knowing exactly what's going to happen. Those three areas of uncertainty really are what drive ultimately the decisions that get made, and everybody is trying to understand how you can go forth given these uncertainties. And we have a lot of experience in projecting out. We look at policy across the country, both locally, statewide, and federally, to try to read the tea leaves and see what's being discussed long before it ever makes it into legislation, things of that nature, so that we can get an understanding of where things are likely headed. We have a lot of technologists in across our company that are always researching and staying on top of what's happening with new emerging technologies and disruptive technologies, so that we can try to stay ahead of the curve and understand how those technologies are going to impact the energy sector as they mature, if they mature. And then finally, market uncertainties, market design, and market dynamics certainly play a part in how resources plan unfold, how Santa Cooper's plan is going to unfold, recognizing that this is not a truly organized independent system operator market like there are in other areas of the country. We still recognize that there is an electric market here. There are trades and back and forth and purchase agreements that go back and forth between market players here in South Carolina, and so it's a bilateral market. It's not a it's not a real time settlement market like there are in other areas, but when we think about resource planning, we understand that nobody is an island. The electric grid is interconnected from utility to utility. And so we are always looking for that balance between a given utility's reliability needs and its own energy needs and its own energy supplies versus what its neighboring utilities and even neighboring states are doing, given the interconnected nature of the grid and the ability for one utility to purchase power or sell power to another utility. So that's sort of, we are always of the view that a given utility's resource plan is really only as good as how it sits within the wider perspective, the wider market that it sits within, and the ability of that utility to take advantage of the surrounding market, and hopefully not get taken advantage of. So, as I said, we're looking forward to this interview and to the prospect of working with you all. Certainly can answer your questions as they come.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we'll open up to questions. Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Thank you and welcome. It's nice to look up and see you and be able to connect with you, and appreciate your opening statement and your being here and your interest, as we do everybody's interest. I have a number of questions that I want to run through, and feel free to amplify them. But have you ever appeared before the Public Service Commission of South Carolina as a party, as a consultant, a witness, a representative for a party? And if so, where and which docket and what party?
Great, thank you. A number of the people who are on the call today and myself have appeared before the commission on May 11th of this year for an interview for prior dockets 2023, 15, 16, and 17E for the avoided cost dockets. So we did appear in front of you at that time. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any member of our team who has appeared before the commission as a party.
Have you ever been employed or retained as a consultant for the South Carolina Public Service Authority, aka Santee Cooper, or any of its affiliates? And when I say you, I'm really meaning PA Consulting as a group, as well as any of you individually.
Sure, thank you. So it's an easy answer with respect to the rest of PA and the rest of our team. I am not aware of anybody that has been engaged or worked for Santa Cooper. However, for myself, I have worked with a prior employer in the 2014 to 2015 timeframe I worked with Sandy Cooper directly, helping them do modeling for their IRP at that time. And I was with a former employer, so there was nobody here that, nobody on this team that did the same. There is at least one member of PA who also had, while with a prior employer, and it was the same employer at the time, who had done a number of rate studies for Sandy Cooper at that time. His name is Mr. Andy Rieger. I have checked with him since he has joined PA. He has not done any work for Sandy Cooper.
And will Mr. Rieger be a part of your team?
He may be available, well, he will be available to us for consultation to the extent that his expertise is in rates and rate making, to the extent that we need to call on him to get his thoughts on some aspects of the IRP. We certainly would and would plan to.
And the flip side of that, well, that question is, have you or any of your employees, associates, contractors, or partners ever been retained to represent Santee Cooper or investor-owned public utilities in South Carolina? So it's really the latter part of that question. If so, when and what were the monetary amounts of the contracts?
So we, PA, beyond myself and Mr. Rieger that I just mentioned, but that was with a prior employee or prior employer. We are currently, we're not aware of any current engagements with Sandy Cooper or any other IOUs in South Carolina. However, we, in the relatively recent past, in the 2018 and 2019 timeframe, we had done some work with Duke Energy as well as Dominion, South Carolina, on matters related to, with the Duke, it was some work around their distribution system. Apologies, I'm not super familiar with the work. It's not my area. And the same with Dominion. I think I can find out the specifics of those and circle back to that during this, if that makes sense. I had them on my screen for the last time, and I didn't this time, so we can certainly get it and get back to you.
That sounds good. Feel free also to just submit it through our docket system after the fact.
Yep.
Now, switching gears a little bit, do you or any members of your immediate family, partners at PA, or associates own bonds in Santee Cooper? And if so, tell us more about that.
I will say that I do not, nobody in my family. And does that question apply more to the entire PA team?
Yes.
Yeah, we checked. We are not aware of anybody owning any bonds.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any reason to believe that you cannot serve as a fair, impartial, or independent consultant for this docket?
I do not. I do not believe that we cannot serve. Being an independent consultant is part of our core ethos, and frankly, we would not be in business if we could not be independent. And we maintain that through independence, through actually working across the entire spectrum, working for investors, developers, regulatory agencies, utilities. The fact that we work for everybody at some point, we believe gives us our independence, because it demonstrates that we're not simply in one camp or another, if that makes sense. So, being able to be independent is a critical underpinning, and I know there's some questions later. We can talk about the conflicts checks and how we manage through any potential conflicts.
I appreciate the longer answer. I was really going to ask you to amplify. I expected you to say, that there was no issue with this, but I appreciate the fuller answer.
Sure. We take a lot of pride in our independence.
Do you have any ongoing business with parties in this docket? You meaning PA, and if so, what are they? Do you have any ongoing business dealings with the parties in docket 2022-105E, and if so, what are they? And recognize that we have certain interveners at this point, the Office of Regulatory Staff and the Department of Consumer Affairs, but there may be a number of others who will come to the table that will become interveners, and some of those that just might be possibilities are the individual electric cooperatives in South Carolina, Centric Electric Cooperative, the clean energy and environmental groups such as Carolina's Clean Energy Business Association, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, the Coastal Conservation League, Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, Boat Solar. I'm just going through them so you can think through, but individual solar companies, industrial customers or groups representing industrial and big users of energy, and then just interested customers.
Yep, understood. Generally, we're not aware of any current engagements with any of those entities, certainly not any of the IOUs or co-ops or Santa Cooper at the moment. I will say that we do a lot of work with developers and investors around the country, and it's possible that as this engagement unfolds, one or more of them may become an intervener in this docket. I don't know. We have a very rigorous process that we use to deal with that. What we do prior to an engagement is we run a conflicts check, and we determine that as of that day, we have no engagements with anyone who might conceivably be an intervener or a party to this. As interveners intervene, as they become known and as they intervene in the docket, each time that happens, we watch the docket, and then we run an additional conflict check to make sure that we are not working with that intervener in another matter. If we find that we do, we then have a rigorous process to separate our teams and make sure that the people who are working on that intervener, let's say it's a solar developer somewhere, we make sure that we're compartmentalized from them and that we don't share information, and we take it very seriously. I've been on so many calls in my career where somebody will mention one word and somebody will say, hey, we cannot talk about that. We're compartmentalized. It's pretty effective and it works very well. So that's what we pledge to you. We're an independent evaluator of procurements across the country, and that's also a very critical topic to maintain that independence. And in those jurisdictions, that's exactly what we do as well. As soon as there are other interveners, or in the case of procurements, we look through the entire list of bidding entities and make sure that the team that is working on this IRP review or a procurement review, this team does not have any cross contact with the team that is working with the other entity. And at that time, we also have we have separate IT systems. We have separate, not full separate systems, but we have compartmentalized and secure data storage between the two teams so that we are not even allowed to open that folder and see any data, and vice versa.
Interesting. Are you currently in any negotiations to represent any of the parties before the Public Service Commission or Public Utilities Commission? And if so, what are they?
As of the time of our proposal, we were not in any negotiations with any of these parties. as we said, we at the beginning of every engagement. So at the time of our proposal, we were not. Should we be awarded this work, we will run that check again, and then we run it continuously throughout the engagement as other entities become known.
Do you hold any licenses, degrees, designations, or credentials that qualify you as an expert in the field of electric utility matters? If so, where did you earn those? And I'm asking both you and the team as a whole.
Understood. So our team includes degreed engineers, economists, mathematicians. Jim Heidel holds an economics degree. I personally hold a geology degree. However, I have about 27 years experience in the energy industry, most of that through consulting to, literally hundreds of clients. I also spent 6 years in the resource planning department with Xcel Energy and developed 2 integrated resource plans while I was with Xcel. And since then, as a consultant, I've either led the development of integrated resource plans, and also have critiqued other integrated resource plans. I'm an independent evaluator, and I've overseen procurements of many utilities over the years as well, including San Diego Gas and Electric, Pacific Gas and Electric, Pacific Core, and a few co-ops in Indiana as well. So I've got a long experience in resource planning and procurement issues looking at utilities. And Ms. Bilbao has also a significant amount of experience there as well.
Yeah, so I hold a math degree as well as an environmental policy degree. I also have some IRP experience from working in California. I've also, had significant experience in the independent evaluation sphere working for commissioners, but under different lenses of regulation, looking at wildfire mitigation and Rule 21 interconnection in California. So have some experience in independent auditing as well. And we also have team members who, again, have backgrounds in electrical engineering, accounting, finance, and that can also provide great insight into the work that we'll perform.
And this is Matt Morin. Sorry for the interruption from the virtual land, but pleasure to be in front of the commission again. Thank you for having us. Would also like to add that in terms of our team's comparative advantages, energy policy, energy markets, and rate advisory are really the 3 primary comparative advantages that we hold in the market. And that takes us all sorts of places in the market overall in terms of qualifying us. But in terms of broad qualifications, we've had over 2 decades of developing market and analytic tools to support decision making. Charles covered the independent evaluator work. We've conducted and created independent resource plans in addition to Charles' historical experience at Xcel and other places. And we're a trusted advisor to regulators in states such as North Dakota, New York, Oregon, among others. And it's, we're not able to accomplish that type of track record without being highly credentialized in the space overall, just by anecdotal evidence. Thank you.
Thank you for shedding some more light on that question. Mr. Morin, do I have it correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. You talked a bit about IRPs that PA Consulting has done. Would you elaborate on that?
Yes. We've done independent integrated resource plans in the matters of when we do electric rate forecasting. We have to dig into the integrated resource plan of, any vertically integrated utility for, certain matters such as investment advisory around distributed energy resources, for example. And, that comes down to triangulating between the black and white independent resource plan that's put on paper, perhaps investor presentations in the case of investor-owned utility, as well as where we see the future of policy, economics, technology, as Charles outlined earlier going. That's one example. Another is in the case of vertically integrated utilities, we have the commercial market policy advisory role in some significant investment and overall opportunities. So in that context, we then would come up with, based on our own long-term view of policy, technology, energy markets, of what we think the long-term tried and true integrated resource plan outlook would be, which at times, as you get further and further out in time, could be different from what the utility itself may be projecting.
And specifically at PA, we do have experience working in the California area with investor-owned utilities working on their IRP. Also at a prior firm, I led the development of a small IOU's IRP, bringing that to PA and continuing to update that now. And then I also have a background working at a municipal utility, developing their load forecasts and IRP inputs. And then I also have an American Public Power Association Advanced Cost of Service certification. So I failed to mention that earlier.
And one final note on that, just to follow up on what Mr. Morin was getting at. We do a lot of work advising investors on investing in or acquiring other utilities. And when they do that, they often need to understand what the long-term outlook of that utility is going to be. Mm-hmm. And so we develop, as Matt said, an independent view of that long-term resource plan. And we do that sometimes with some of the company's data, oftentimes only with publicly available data. But the reason I bring it up is because what happens in those circumstances is our clients and or other bidders on the utility are going to have the utility's IRP in hand, and then we've got PA's view of what that is going to look like. And so we get into this situation of comparing and contrasting PA's view of what that utility could or should do in the long term versus what the utility's own plan says. And it struck us that that's a very comparable situation to what you all are looking for here. Here, in this case, we will have pretty good access to the company's actual data, which will be very helpful, but we will still be able to use our own modeling, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but our own modeling and be able to develop a view and then be able to compare it to the utility's view, and importantly, explain to other interested parties why we have a different view and what the drivers behind those differences are. And we've got a lot of experience doing that, and I think that'll come to light and be very helpful in this effort.
Thank you. Mr. Morin, I want to go back to you for a second. I think I heard you talk about being resources advisors to maybe North Dakota and Oregon and maybe another state. Was that to a public utility commission?
Correct. So we're often asked to report to public utility commissions in various matters and capacities. In the case of New York, we've been working for the staff of New York for over 3 years, I believe it is, on basically the natural gas moratoriums for new customer hookups in downstate New York via Con Edison and National Grid. Don't want to go into too much of a history lesson, but ultimately, when it comes to midstream pipeline capacity expansion, the policy view there is to not allow for incremental expansion of midstream natural gas pipelines, and so you have to do more with less as it relates to new customer hookups in and around the city. And so we've been advising the DPS staff and reporting to the commission on various matters there over the course of 3 years. Jim Heidel would be probably best to give a brief overview, or Charles of North Dakota. And then in the case of Oregon, I have to be a little careful here because I'm not clear on what's confidential versus not, but we have been in front of the commission multiple times. One of them as it relates to some speculative merchant power positions impacting utility earnings in a quite drastic way, and putting at risk creditworthiness. And we ultimately investigated what went wrong in terms of risk management and how they got into those speculative positions. And also in the independent evaluator context, we've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of bids from various generation developers, and ultimately help conclude that the right selection is being made in the independent evaluator context and then reported to the commission. Charles or Jim, would you like to expand on North Dakota? And these are just 3 examples that come to mind.
This is Jim Heidel. Good morning. Thank you for having us in front of you. Just briefly, for North Dakota, we work for the North Dakota advocacy staff. We've advised them, submitted testimony on their behalf, and engaged in settlement discussions on their behalf on probably about 10 to 12 utility applications for advanced determination of prudence for acquiring new resources. So that involves, looking at the economics, looking at the IRPs, and checking for consistency. And
Mr. Heidel,
yes,
could you speak a little closer into your microphone so we can hear you well?
my apologies. Is this better?
Just a little bit. Maybe speak up a bit.
Okay, I will speak up a bit. So we've advised, we've submitted testimony, assisted in settlement negotiations for probably 10 to 12 advanced determinations of prudence that have been filed by 3 different utilities for acquiring new resources. We've also worked with advocacy staff on, I believe, reviewing 2 different rate cases filed by utilities that operate in North Dakota.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Williams, one more item that I probably should have brought up earlier when we were talking about reviewing other utilities' plans and creating our own. We actually did that. We had multiple teams at PA working for different investor groups, all who were interested in purchasing Santee Cooper during that sale process a couple of years ago. And as part of that, we very much looked at their long-term planning and developed our own view of their long-term plan. And in that process, the group that I was personally working with advanced through the process to negotiations with Santee Cooper, and we represented our group in those negotiations. We talked through quite a bit about our view of their long-term resources versus their view. Central Cooperative was in the room at the time. We're very familiar with Santee Cooper and how it does its planning, and we've got we already have our own view of how Santee Cooper sits within the wider markets here due to those efforts. And I think that will serve us very well and serve the commission very well should we be selected, given our history and our familiarity.
Thank you for that addition. Are you all members of trade and utility trade related groups or organizations? And you know what? I need to go back. Has anybody lost their credentials in any of these in any of these professional groups that you're a part of?
Yeah, we're not aware of anyone losing their credentials.
Okay, so moving on to the next one. Are you a member of utility-related trade groups or organizations? And if so, what are they and what are the missions of those groups?
So, PA as a whole, I am aware that PA has a membership in the American Gas Association, the American Society of Appraisers, the Western Energy Institute, the UK Nuclear Industry Association.
I ask.
We actually are headquartered in London, although our U.S. operations tend to run here by ourselves. But that would be the UK. We have a membership in a group called A Word About Wind, the Westminster Energy Forum, and the Association of Women in Water, Energy, and the Environment, and the Women's Energy Network. I'm not aware of any additional memberships that PA has in any typical energy type related associations. And I'm not aware of anyone on our team having individual membership in any other associations. But as I said, PA is about 3,000 people, so it's possible that there are some.
Any memberships that are significant from team members?
None that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Just AWE for me.
And who is that?
Oh, the Association of Women in Water, Energy, and the Environment.
Right. And that's covered. Okay. Thank you. Are you all set to provide a written proof of conflicts check later this week?
We can. We provided a specific conflicts check in our proposal, and we are happy to provide a standalone conflicts letter at the end of this week. And as I said in the earlier discussion, we will again, as of this week, run the conflicts check again. Given that we submitted our proposal a number of weeks ago, we'll update that prior to filing that in the docket.
Thank you. Are you aware of any reason that you or your firm should not serve as an independent expert in this docket?
No, I'm not aware of any conflicts, any reasons why we would not be able to be an independent expert in this docket. And as I said, there's lots of reasons why we should.
Mm-hmm. If you are hired as a consultant, I skipped over one. Are you willing to abstain from any unauthorized ex parte contact with current or future parties in this docket?
Yes, we are. We're well aware of the ex parte rules here in South Carolina. And it is our expectation that all contact that would need to happen either with commission staff, or the staff at Santee Cooper itself, any of those communications would happen through interrogatories and data requests filed through the docket.
Thank you. And kind of for the record orally, what's the schedule for your project completion?
We anticipate, if awarded, to be contracted in September of this year, but to begin work in February or so early 2023, completing in September of 2023.
What are the estimated hours per task and the estimated total labor hours?
So we can provide our pricing document and submit it in the docket as necessary. But in general, we are expecting 700 hours for the total project. And we have that split into 6 different tasks, with the majority focused in the independent modeling and scenario development of Santee Cooper's IRP. And that is about an average hourly rate of $350 for a total of $252,000.
Okay. You probably looked this one up. South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-37-40. What information does the commission need to receive from your firm in that regard?
No direct information is requested apart from having an independent verification evaluation of Santee Cooper's IRP presented to the commission within the docket's scheduled timeline of Santee Cooper's IRP evaluation and any additional expert witness support as a result of the evaluation.
Okay, I have a few questions about your relationship to Santee Cooper. Is there anybody who currently works for PA Consulting who worked for a public utility or for Santee Cooper in the past?
So there are, again, with the number of people that we have, we are not aware of anybody who has worked directly with Santee Cooper within PA or on our team. notwithstanding the prior consulting that I discussed earlier. But as far as being an employee, we are not aware of any. There are people who are at PA who have been members of public power utilities in the past, employees of public power utilities in the past. We're not aware of any in the state of South Carolina, but Ms. Bilbao can speak to her experience.
Yes, I worked in California at Alameda Municipal Power for a number of years prior to joining the consulting industry. And I was also a member of APPA and two joint action agencies, one for transmission and another for joint power pool for municipal utilities.
Okay. Is there anyone who worked for PA Consulting in the past who currently works for a public utility or for Santee Cooper?
We are not aware of anyone who works for Santee Cooper, a prior employee of PA who works for Santee Cooper or public utilities within the state of South Carolina. We are aware many of our employees tend to can occasionally leave and go work for larger investor-owned utilities, but we're not aware of any public power in the state of South Carolina.
Okay. And is there anyone associated with PA who has an affiliation with a public utility company or with Santee Cooper? So affiliation just is a broader net. So you may have the same answer, but just casting a broader net.
Understood. We're not aware of any direct affiliations. Certainly not with Santee Cooper. And Ms. Bilbao mentioned her affiliations with other groups
That are not currently active.
Okay.
My role with PA.
Okay. And I skipped over one. Is PA Consulting involved with any political action committees?
So PA Consulting does not contribute to any political action committees as an organization. Individual contributions to PACs I'm not aware of any, and wouldn't know about them anyway.
Right. And last, are you associated with any matters pending before the Public Service Commission of South Carolina now, or have you in the past?
Not aware of any representation at the moment of any matters related to the South Carolina Commission, and not aware of any direct interaction between PA and the South Carolina Commission, with the exception of our interview with me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers as well as the team that's supporting you that's on the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I had it all lined out and then all this kind of got it out of kilter, so bear with me.
No problem.
Well, let me just, I guess, start thinking in terms of the IRP and modeling and that sort of thing. The modeling that PA does, is that in-house?
It is. It is.
And is that with your PA's own model? Is it a proprietary model?
The vast majority of our market modeling, we use commercially available software by. Actually, I'm not sure of the vendor. I think that they've sold it, but it's the Aurora production cost and capacity expansion modeling model software. That's what we use, but we also have, there is no one model when you're looking at energy markets. So we have a number of internally developed models that we use in conjunction with the Aurora production cost and capacity expansion software.
And you probably heard me ask this question earlier, but, and you say you've done this before. Would trying to replicate Santee Cooper's model, are you trying to replicate it, or are you trying to use your model to either verify their model or distinguish things that are not jiving, so to speak?
Understood. All of the above. So, we've done this enough times that we are very well aware that it is nearly impossible to replicate and reproduce the results of somebody else's modeling. Frankly, even if we were all to use the exact same data and the exact same software, there's a number of random generators that get used when models look out and project things, and even the exact same model will produce very slightly different results due to that issue. But much more than that, what our plan here will be is we are going to review Santee Cooper's modeling. We are going to review all of their assumptions and their inputs and then their outputs and their conclusions related to their own input assumptions. We are going to do that, and to the extent that we if we see anything that looks off, we expect to communicate through the docket, through data requests with the utility with Santee Cooper to try to understand what the issue is. Apart from that, and more centrally to this report, we will take our own assumptions, our own view of the market, our own view of all of the drivers that go into a resource plan, and model that out ourselves using our model and our other tools, and then compare and contrast our results and conclusions with Santee Cooper's. It's never an exercise in trying to get the exact same answer, but we're trying to understand if we view the world this way, and our model is coming up with these results, and we're using those results to come up with conclusions. We're trying to understand, to the extent that we come up with different conclusions than Santee Cooper did, that's the issue. That's where we will interface with Santee Cooper to try to understand what's driving those differences and be able to explain to you all what those drivers are. Having said that, there are a number of data sets that we would expect to use from the utility itself. There are things such as its transmission topology, its existing generation, things that are not really subject to interpretation. They are just this is what their system looks like. Most of that data we will take from the company so that we can make sure that we're not making an assumption about a generating plant that just isn't true. They have much better insight into what their plants capacities are and things of that nature. Other drivers such as fuel prices, long-term other market drivers, we will use our own assumptions and opinion there, and come up with our view of what a reasonable resource plan for Santee Cooper would be given all of that information. So there'll be a little bit of using their data, most of it using our data, and then being able to come up with a view of their plan and then compare and contrast it to their own developed plan. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
And on page 21 in our proposal, in table 4-1, we have listed the inputs and assumptions and indicating what are different from Sandy Cooper's and which are the same.
Very small page numbers.
This is Martin Szczepanik from PA. Just one thing to add is that we will be using the same portfolio cases as well as the same sensitivities as Santee Cooper did. And we got that information from the public stakeholder meeting number 3 that they held back in June. So this will also help us compare apples to apples when we do our independent modeling. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
All right, on your page 21, you were referring to, were you talking about like the task 5, the task 6? I mean, what?
It's under task 4, table
Oh,
4-1.
okay, so is that page 20?
Oh, it's listed 21, but it could be page 20.
Okay, yeah, I did see that particular chart.
Yes.
Okay, it's on page 20. And I was actually, well, before I get to the base case and the other stuff, in your opening, and I want to make sure I understood that too, you were talking about, I guess, an IRP is a best guess plan considering, I think this is what you were saying. I want to make sure I understand. The 3 areas you mentioned, trying to read the tea leaves
Sure.
and
Policy.
look into the future that no one can really do, but trying to do the best you can based on experience and what's out there, emerging technologies, which way is the politics blowing, which can change in a month. You mentioned policy, technology, and markets. The variability, or who knows. So from that, am I hearing relative to PA's view of, as you do a IRP or view it, develop it, those are pretty much the 3 areas that you would use relative to sensitivities and such as that? How do these things tie into an IRP development and evaluation?
Great question. I think the way to answer that is, certainly there are some very specific uncertainties. Let's say Sandy Cooper's load going forward. Nobody knows what their load is going to be. In general, we would consider that, along with fuel prices and other supply. All of that would generally sort of fall under the broad umbrella of the market uncertainty, because they're a player in the market, and so their uncertainties contribute to the market's uncertainty, right? Essentially, resource planning is always a balance and a mix of trying to understand what the best mix of resources is that's going to reliably meet a utility's obligation to provide power at a reasonably or least cost, in a reasonably low or least cost manner, least cost best fit, essentially. And so we have models, right, that will take all of these inputs and come up with a solution, and say, this is, here's a number of plans that could meet this utility's load in this manner. We use the model results, but we much more so use them as an input into our own decision-making process. It's not a simple matter of taking the number that gets spit out of the model and say, that's it, right? We have to use our own judgment. And at the end of the day, we model the electric systems across the country basically every day. We do hundreds of modeling runs every single week across the country, and we have a very good insight into the direction of pricing given the current direction of policy, markets, and technology. Over the years, we've gained insights into how much a given policy change, if should it happen, what that is going to do to a particular region and how that's going to impact the prices there. We can lean on our experience doing that, combined with our experience looking at Sandy Cooper and having access to some of Sandy Cooper's data. The juxtaposition of all of that will allow us to come up with our own conclusions about the future of Sandy Cooper and what the most reasonable cost and reliable plan is going to be, and importantly compare it to Sandy Cooper's plan and be able to explain to you all, if there are any significant differences, why we think those differences exist and our rationale for our plan versus theirs.
Okay. So, with that in mind, do you believe, well, in the development of an IRP, and I think, and I don't remember which gentleman mentioned the June 28th meeting, 3 stakeholder meeting, those 4 portfolios, one being the base case, which I think earlier you said the most reliable and least cost. I'm assuming that would, well, is that the base cost or the base case?
So, we view base case, a base case as being, given everything that is known today, we view the base case as the most expected outcome, right? But even within that, there's some level of judgment because we're making assumptions around what future fuel prices are going to be, what future loads are going to be. We do our best to make sure that those views are the expected, a reasonably expected outcome to come up with that base case. Now, Sandy Cooper then has a number of portfolios and sensitivities that they subject their plan to try to look at it. What if there are a series of what ifs, right? What if gas prices are different? What if load is different? Things of that nature. For our independent modeling, what we will do is dive into Sandy Cooper's their explanations of those cases, how they arrived at their view of future gas prices, how they arrived at their view of future loads and future regional supplies. We will take those drivers and then come up with our own view of what call it a high gas cost case may look like, and it will depend on how their reasoning for developing those alternate assumptions, but use that reasoning to develop our own assumptions of what that looks like, if that makes sense.
Understand, makes sense. So, from that, or I guess in addition to that, do you believe, I guess, when you look at these other portfolios, or however many, 4 right here, that there should be no technology bias one way or the other, and more technology neutral, rather than more so this way and that way, or should it just be a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're asking. So essentially, the whole point of resource planning is to try to take your best assumptions around future costs of technologies and future policy that are encouraging or discouraging certain technologies, and come up with a plan that makes sense to you, and given your loads. In some cases, if there is a need to say, what if the world evolves this way? What if these technologies are projected to become very low cost in the future? Then it behooves you to consider that as an input. If you've got reasonable assumptions going forward around a given technology, you have to do your best to represent that in the modeling, and understand if that's going to come up with a plan that might be heavy on those technologies. There's no reason, with an exception, there's no reason to predetermine the outcome and say, well, we want a gas heavy outcome, or we want a renewable heavy outcome. That's not the point. The point is to try to determine what the best outcome is, regardless of any preferences at the moment around those technologies. Now, there's always cases where a utility or an entity may be directed to go procure resources of one type of technology. There's renewable energy standards all across the country that require a utility to meet a certain percentage of its load with clean energy technology, and but we view that's no longer an uncertainty. That's a directive, right? And so you have to model whatever the current directives and current rules and regulations are, and in the future, to the extent that some of those goals are sliding scales that increase or decrease over time, you model those. But as I said, we don't view that as an uncertainty because it's current law or it's current regulation. In some cases, we do model alternate scenarios as if perhaps some of those rules are going to change. That's our policy tea leaves I was talking about. We're very good at understanding the direction of legislation and policy, and if we think there's reason to believe that policy is going to change in the future, if we have a reasonable case for that, then we will model that case on a what if basis.
Good. And PA is very familiar, or I assume, or will be very familiar with South Carolina law relative to IRPs. And it's a little different than California.
Yeah, a little different than California, just a little.
Some
But it also goes back to, yes, but as I said, to the extent that there is specific directives and rules, those have to be followed. But we also consider the wider sort of regional market, right? Like, for example, South Carolina, exchanges power with other Santa Cooper exchanges power with other utilities, and it's able to buy and sell power on the bilateral market. And so what that means then is that other entities and neighboring states and neighboring region, their policies and their directives do have an impact over time, because it wouldn't make sense for Santa Cooper to pursue one path and do something as if it were an island when it's not an island. And if it were to go down the path of pursuing resources that don't generally fit within the wider market, then what you could conceivably end up in a scenario where so Santa Cooper ratepayers are paying for something when it wouldn't be necessary because neighboring areas may have a lower cost solution and available to sell that power to Santa Cooper, and you end up with a mismatch, right? Now in a bilateral market, generally Santa Cooper is going to need to plan as if it's largely on its own, because it needs to be able to make sure that it's going to have its resources available when it needs them. But you have to balance that against what the regional market is looking like, and make sure you understand that that the utilities plan doesn't get too far out of sync of what the more regional market looks like.
Is that what you mean by bilateral?
Yeah. So bilateral is it generally, my understanding of it is that it's just a term that refers to individual transactions between two entities, rather than perhaps as in a settled market such as PJM or MISO, where all of those transactions happen through the clearinghouse of the market itself. So a bilateral would be Santa Cooper contracting directly with other entities.
All right, two more questions and I'm through. I wasn't planning on going down those trails, but I just couldn't help it. You just
It's an interesting
lured me in
topic.
them.
I'm happy to talk more about it.
do you know if Santee Cooper uses in-house modeling, or did they contract that out?
Well, it's a good question. As I said, a number of years ago, they contracted it out to me and my firm. I expect that I actually don't know.
Yeah, I believe they use Astrape
Astrape.
as their modeler.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I believe they're using Astrape to do their modeling.
And Astrape is another third-party consulting firm that does a lot of market and resource planning modeling.
Okay. I'm trying to think, he said, she said, I mean, I know that's always a challenge. So and you don't have to answer this because it's a rhetorical question, I guess. Why is yours better than theirs? And which I'm assuming that's what the hearing will tell us.
Well, Mr. Cash, or Commissioner Cash, and I apologize. This is Matt Morin again. In my 2 decades plus experience on energy market modeling, asset analytics, and other means, it's been our observation, and we've used almost every production cost modeling tool. So Aurora, Astrape, I'm not going to list them all, but
Mr. Morin, can you talk a little louder? You kind of faded out.
Sure. Effectively, any market asset analytic tool in the energy space is a means to the end. What's important is, in the case of market analytics, what tends to occur is it's production cost stacking, and it looks to seek to minimize total system cost. And effectively, all of the analytic tools are ultimately looking to accomplish that same objective. It's the expertise and the assumptions and the outputs that surround those tools that are ultimately the secret sauce, so to speak, on being reasonably predictive about the future and ending up with least cost, lowest risk portfolio on behalf of the consumer. Thank you.
I think that's all I have. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to follow up with for some of this discussion with Commissioner Caston. We will be charged with reviewing and either approving, modifying, or rejecting Santee Cooper's IRP. The Santee Cooper IRP will have some additional requirements in it than what our investor-owned utilities IRPs have, and that's in the statute, which you've obviously read. Is there a kind of a reasonableness standard? I mean, you may come up with different results than what's in Santee Cooper's IRP. They may not match exactly, but if you were awarded this job, would it be that, well, would you give an answer similar to, we got different results, but theirs is certainly reasonable because of this, or whatever assumptions might have gone in? I reckon it's almost a zone of reasonableness type analogy. Just because you don't come up with the exact same thing, that doesn't mean that portions of what was submitted need to be rejected. Does that make where I'm going with this?
It makes a lot of sense. It goes back to what I had said earlier. It would be impossible to come up with the same answer, almost impossible. And when I say same, what do you mean by same? You know, certainly we would expect to come up with directionally similar results, right? And to the extent that there are vast differences between what we would conclude about a reasonable plan versus what they present in their IRP, that is the point of this whole exercise, is for us to try to interface with them through data requests in the docket to try to get an understanding of, you know, why are we coming out different, and be able to explain to them, we see these types of results and your results look different, and can you help us understand why that may be? We're very adept at understanding what drivers different assumptions are going to have. If our view of gas prices is very significantly different than their view of gas prices, then that right there is going to come up with different results. Could end up in materially different resource acquisitions. In a case like that, one thing that we plan to do is we don't plan to ask Santee Cooper to do any additional runs kind of for us, unless we come across a situation like that where we just need to understand. We're going to have our view of some of these market drivers like load and resource and regional supply and gas prices. We think it's that independent view that is of value to you all. But to the extent that our modeling would show one thing based on those assumptions, and their modeling shows something different because they had different assumptions, if the difference is large enough, then we may consider asking them, could you run our gas prices through your model? Because we just want to make sure that if you were to use ours, that you would get a similar result. Because then we know that the only source of the difference is that. You try to isolate the source of differences so that we can explain to you all why we think we would get a different plan. So we would probe and stress test that to try to get an understanding of where those differences might lie. And it does come down to a zone of reasonableness. If, for example, there are, you know, however many, you know, resources that are going to be acquired or retired in Santee Cooper's plan, and if our plan matches almost exactly with, say, one different resource, then we would say, yeah, directionally we're on the same page. We've kind of come up with a very similar plan. That 2032 resource might be a little different, but you'll have time to course correct long before you get there. Things of that nature. Okay. But if we come up with very, very different looks, then we need to understand why, and we need to explain to you all why.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I like that in your presentation, you kind of outlined your team. You know, you have the 12, 13 members here listed. And I assume from looking at it that if, you know, it's football season in the South, that Mr. Moore will be the quarterback and will be the one as far as testimony.
Mr. Morin is less likely to be the testimony. It very likely would either be myself or Mr. Heidel. I have witness testimony in front of the North Dakota Commission. Mr. Heidel has witness testimony in front of many, many entities. So, yeah, it will be one of our more senior members, either myself or Mr. Heidel, who would do the actual testimony.
Okay, thank you for that. And Ms. Millbow, if I heard it right, you said a time frame from February till September,
Correct.
8 months.
So the majority of the work would be performed after Sandy Cooper files their IRP in May. And so there will be a 3.5 month sprint in doing the replication independent verification, whereas work prior to that might be preparatory and anticipating the work for the evaluation. And then after completing the final report, if there is a request or ongoing need for expert witness, that would be after that fact.
Okay, and looking at the descriptions as far as who does what, the roles, it seems like you're the one that's keeping all the puppies in the box.
That's right. That's right.
And in doing so, will you be responsible for discovery issues and making sure the interrogatories, different things that may come your way are answered timely, or is there an attorney on staff who does that?
That will be me. I don't believe we have attorney support on this engagement, but I want to clarify.
So we do have in-house counsel, and they are always available to us to to participate as needed. As far as following the docket and following the interrogatories and all of the administrative and commission type issues that will come up on to support in the end, Jim and I are very experienced at following dockets and staying on top of the data requests and interfacing through dockets in that way. We do that all the time, particularly for North Dakota, as he mentioned, and we also participate in dockets out through our Pacific Core independent evaluator work, and there's a lot of similar type commission administrative stuff going back and forth that we stay on top of. But to the extent that we've got some particular concern about the legality of something, we do have in-house counsel. But in terms of needing counsel to follow the docket, that is not our plan. We'll do that internally to this team.
And you feel confident if you have to provide data or provide discovery, whatever request you receive from any of the parties that may be involved?
We're very confident. We routinely respond to interrogatories and data requests in our other regulatory work. I've been doing it 20 years. I'm very familiar and comfortable.
All right. Let's say you do it. Does somebody review it, or does the attorney review it, or do you each all look at it, or before you send something out, or?
So ultimately, it tends to be Mr. Heidel who is the final reviewer. He's got the most experience, frankly, in dealing with testimony issues. But we also recognize that, we've got a team, but ultimately, whoever is testifying is ultimately responsible, right? If I'm going to testify this report to you all in that hearing, it will be having myself reviewed everything and myself being confident of the facts and what I will be saying. The buck stops with the person who's at the microphone at that point.
And as far as providing us with some, and I think the terms have been used, a clear, written, understandable report, who will be responsible for the report? Any one person, or is that a team effort?
It is a team effort. We write a lot of reports. We write a lot of regulatory reports, as well as we do a lot of investor support, and the finance community they really need very clear, very concise, very brevity, to make sure that it's not some 500-page report that you all have to plow through. That's what we do. We're very good at clear, concise, brief explanations. Not so brief you don't get it, but not so long that it's extra pages in the report. That's what we do, is being able to convey our conclusions in that manner.
Okay, and as far as testifying, I'm impressed or happy that y'all are here today. If you were testifying, would you do that virtually, or would you prefer to do that in person?
We would prefer to do it in person. So to the extent that there's a lot of back and forth through the docket, and maybe even potentially meetings or commission meetings addressing the issue, some jurisdictions, there's more meetings throughout the process. Other jurisdictions, there's just sort of one at the end. Either way, most of those we would do virtually. If there's any meeting that is prior to the final report, we would likely do it virtually. But when presenting our report and our conclusions and testifying to that, I would expect to travel and be here in front of you all.
Which means you would have main responsibility for drafting the report, and that expert witness would really be fully responsible at the high level.
Precisely. Whoever is testifying is ultimately responsible for the report as well.
Well, and this is, I guess a real question is, and you're familiar with other companies, and I know you all kind of know each other to some degree. What would be the benefit of awarding you the contract to us?
I think it's a couple of pronged answer. One of which, as I emphasized earlier, is our independence. We make sure that the team that works on these types of assignments is truly independent from any outside influence by any other company that may be an intervener or involved somehow. Additionally, just our experience generally in modeling and understanding the electricity markets, even here in this part of the country. As I said, we look at the markets every day. We are very aware of every resource that is being talked about, and as soon as iron goes in the ground, we're very aware of it. We've got an idea of what those resources look like. When there are developments on the load side, when there are large additions to load, we're very aware of it. So we've got a very clear picture of what the environment in which Santee Cooper operates in looks like. Further and finally, we've got a very strong familiarity with Santee Cooper itself. I've consulted directly for them in the past. I've developed a resource plan for them in the past. PA as a whole and teams within PA looked at Santee Cooper under the microscope during the sales process a couple of years ago. We have a very good understanding of the resources and the loads, the dynamic with Central Co-op and how big a role they play in Santee Cooper's plans. We're very aware of the nuclear issue and the debt that Santee Cooper has incurred due to that. We've just got a very strong familiarity with this company, and I think that our value to you will stem from that, even to the extent of having explicitly modeled Santee Cooper just 2 years ago, two and a half. We've got a very good understanding of what its system looks like and how it sits within the regional markets.
And one more question, and it may be irrelevant. It's not a new issue, but cybersecurity is something that seems to be popping up, and there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of investigation to it. Does that play into the IRP or your review on IRP or any part of what will come up and what we're hearing?
Possibly not, but just understanding NERC SIP 13. I have a background in watching that evolve and helping utilities get prepped for understanding their inventory for their system software and assets. And I could see it in the future, at least with looking at capital infrastructure, that being a concern, especially with automation and certain generators at substation level, things that might be from what is considered foreign adversary countries might come into speculation. And so being aware of these technologies, whether they're sourced in a way that are, I guess, more robust in the cybersecurity aspect, that is really launching now. And so lots of utilities are getting that process started. And while it's not directly influenced in IRP, at least in the experience that I personally have, it's becoming a known issue and playing a big role in both physical and cybersecurity.
Thank you, and good luck keeping all the puppies in the box.
I can do it.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioners, further questions?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas, please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank all of you for participating here today. I think I just have one follow-up question, and this is probably directed to Mr. Janicek. This relates to the overall independence, clean slate that you would bring to this project. I thought I heard you say something earlier to the effect that you worked on the possible sale of Santee Cooper and developed our views of its plans. And obviously you do have a lot of experience with Santee Cooper, and that's very important. And I think that's a good thing, but nonetheless, I guess I need some reassurance that you would come to this basically with a clean slate and be able to look at this just totally independently. That's the gist of my question.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Thank you for that. And yes, the reason that I have emphasized our experience in looking at Santee Cooper has been to just represent to you all that we're pretty familiar with the operations, with the prior plans that they've developed, and sort of how they sit here in terms of their long-term planning in the wider environment. When we've looked at them in the past, we've done a deep dive. However, during the sale process, at any rate, there was no direct interaction with anyone at the utility in those types of processes. Everything, it's similar to a docket, actually. Everything is done through requests and through data that's made available to all bidders, of which we were working with one. So it's sort of an arm's length view using some of their data, but much more so our own opinions and conclusions. Having said that, as you know, things change fast, and the energy industry changes even faster. And certainly what I had done back in the 2014-2015 timeframe is a dinosaur compared to today. And even the work we did a couple of years ago, things have changed dramatically. There's been many advancements. For example, a couple of years ago when we were looking at it, the word hydrogen didn't even exist. Or it didn't exist in the context of a resource plan. However, going forward, we expect, not Santee Cooper in particular, but in general, there will be an infusion of potentially gas plants burning hydrogen, things of that nature around the country. That's just an example of how fast things can change. And so, to the extent that we would be looking at this in the spring of 2023, all things will have to be fresh and new and start from that clean slate. Simply because that's prudent. That's how you have to do it. In addition to emphasizing that it's an independent, clean slate view.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Jay Williams, see you reaching for your microphone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I enjoyed listening to your testimony, and it's obvious that you have a lot of experience with South Carolina and Santee Cooper. Based on your understanding of if we were to hire you for Santee Cooper's IRP, based on your understanding of your role, how would you articulate the deliverables that you would provide to the commission?
So I think that the primary deliverables will be our report and recommendation of how the commissioner should think about Santee Cooper's IRP, followed by our testimony of the report and dealing with Q&A periods of us, related to our report. I would say that that's going to be the physical deliverable. That's what we are going to provide, and we will provide testimony. But I view the sort of intangible deliverable is going to be what's in that report and our ability to clearly and concisely describe what we saw in the IRP, where we have critiques of it, where we think it does a great job, and any differences that we would potentially come up with on our own, and the reasons for why those differences exist. Again, it's nobody has a crystal ball, so the best we can do is to describe to you what our view is, why we have that view, what we see that makes us think things are going to go in this given direction, and then compare that to the Santee Cooper view. And you all may be in a position to say, you have your own thoughts on where you think things are going to go, and to the extent that you're aligned with us, you may see our view as being the more reasonable. To the extent that you think our view is sort of different than what you may think, it's your choice to say, well, we appreciate that, but to the extent that we may not have that view, then that's what you all have to decide. But at the end of the day, when we're helping utilities and investors around the country and regulators, everything is about being able to explain and justify our own view and why we think it's reasonable, and be able to present that to you in a clear manner so that you can see how we came up with our recommendation.
And I would probably add to that just understanding the nature of this being Santee Cooper's first time filing to the PSC, knowing that interveners might not be well adjusted to understanding the technical language described in the report. We will keep that in mind when presenting the final recommendation, verification, evaluation of their IRP for the final submittal.
Thank you for that. And just going a little bit further, based on your testimony, it seems clear to me that if you were hired, your report is not going to tell us whether to give the thumbs up or down to Santee Cooper's IRP. It's more so to evaluate it to determine whether or not it's within the zone of reasonableness. Is that correct?
Well, I think that, we do need to be able to make a recommendation to the commission, a recommendation of what we think an appropriate action would be. Now, to the extent that we come up with reasonably close conclusions that Santee Cooper did, you know, I would expect that our recommendation would reflect that. To the extent that we have vastly different views and we are unable to reconcile them through discussions with Santee Cooper, we would have to, you know, recommend that the commission consider our point of view as well. You know, I think that ultimately the commissioner or the commission is in the position of needing to approve or disapprove or revise, as Chair Belser said at the beginning. But our recommendation will be to look at our conclusions and our results and use that in your final deliberations prior to any action the commission may take.
I understand that, and thank you for sharing. Obviously, you all have a fee, and we're going to pay that fee. And I'm sure you understand that we're restricted to the record when making a decision. And so, notwithstanding any education, training experience that we may have, the only information that we can consider in this proceeding will be the facts and evidence that come out during the proceeding, the record, if you will. And so I just want to make sure that, you know, if you're hired, once we get to the end of the proceeding and you make a recommendation, that it's a firm recommendation based on your review, and it's not a recommendation that ends with this phrase that I hear a lot here at the commission. Ultimately, it's up to the commission to make a final determination based on our evaluation. I mean, you're the experts, right? You're here. You submitted a bid. The law considers us experts in this area, and we are looking to hire someone that can stand on a firm recommendation. I just want to make sure that you all feel comfortable doing that and not simply providing a academic or going through an academic exercise and then giving us your results without being able to firmly stand on a recommendation. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And two things on that. Understood on your comment about being able to only rely on what's in the record, and certainly we are very adept at writing reports that encapsulate the full picture of what's feeding into our recommendation. So the report will speak for itself, and the recommendation we make will be based on everything that we provide in the report, so that there's no mystery of how we got to that recommendation, right? But then ultimately, yes, you know, we understand that we will be making a recommendation to the commissioner about whether or not Santee Cooper had come up with a reasonable plan. We have that recommendation. What we can recommend to you what we think about their plan, but we cannot recommend. Trying to think how to say this. We can recommend what we've concluded about their plan. And we can recommend a commission action based on our conclusions of that plan. But we recognize that our recommendation to you is not a directive, it's just a recommendation, and you could choose to go a different direction than our recommendation, certainly. But that's out of our hands. So that it's not a case of you're the commission, it's up to you. We'll make a recommendation, but we understand that it may not be strictly followed by the commission, if that makes sense.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners,
Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I'd like to ask you about, given the fact that to date all of our work in the area of resource planning is focused around investor-owned utilities, how do you think Santee Cooper's different corporate structure is affected in any way in terms of how you review resource planning? Could you give me your thoughts on that? Because, for example, they don't have a return on equity because they don't issue stock. They do have, of course, the issue of the legal settlement that restricts them from raising the ratepayer rates. They cannot file a rate increase until after 2024. And as a result of that and some other concerns, apparently their ratings have slipped with Moody's, and that's further caused problems with cash flow. How would you recommend we think about that in terms of how, when we approach Santee Cooper's planning process?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Irvin. What I would say is, I mean, fundamentally, and you hit on it, fundamentally there's a difference because there is no return on equity. There are no investor shareholders in Santee Cooper that they have to sort of be answerable to and have a fiduciary responsibility to. However, at the end of the day, you know, they are responsible for providing low or least cost power while remaining reliable and while remaining in compliance with any rules, laws, and regulations that they are subject to, right? And so going forward, it may be that their credit issues will impact their ability to obtain lower cost financing for resources in the future, and they have to account for that in their resource planning, which largely comes through the assumptions around the cost of new resources and the cost of financing new resources. We also anticipate that over time, you know, they can't change, they can't file a rate case until 2024. An IRP is generally a 20-year horizon, right? So we expect that over time, they likely would, as they are able to increase rates or decrease rates. I know they had raised them significantly in the years leading up to the settlement to try to deal with the debt on the nuclear deal as it was mounting. But, you know, ultimately we assume that, or we'll be able to assume that over time their credit situation will put them in a position where they can obtain financing similar to other entities in the market, depending on their, you know, depending on what exactly it is that they're looking to finance. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And that leads me to my next question. Do you think that the commission then, given that background, has a responsibility to encourage and foster a regulatory environment that helps them improve their credit rating with Moody's so that they can access appropriate capital for future investments?
Well, what I would say to that is we know that investors in utilities, they give more certainty when a utility has a regulatory environment that is productive and I'm not going to say helpful to the utility, but at the end of the day, If an investor has reason to believe that there's a relationship there where if the utility prudently incurs investments, the regulatory compact is going to allow them to recover the costs of those investments. And when an investor believes that that is there and that the utility will be on firm footing to recover the cost of its investments, then whoever is providing that capital has a much greater degree of comfort, because it knows that the utility is going to be able to recover its costs, as opposed to, for example, some type of merchant, speculative power facility. And when those developers are going to look for investors, then the investor has to rely on the potential for a market-based return on that, and that it's going to make enough money in the market to pay its debts, but there's no regulatory backstop to that. At the end of the day, if the regulators and the utility have a good relationship, and if the regulators understand that the utility is making prudent investments, then there's that sort of regulatory backstop that the investor has comfort in.
Correct. And in that regard, then, ultimately, the ratepayers benefit if the company's financial picture improves. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. It all comes through to that, the availability and cost of debt for future investments.
Right.
And
since Santee Cooper cannot issue common stock, I guess they're limited by bond issues. Is that in whatever revenue they can generate?
it's my understanding that's correct.
Okay. So would it be a fair assumption that since they don't have access to credit markets, it's, so that they can get the most favorable interest rates at this time because of their downgraded credit, is it possible that we should kind of think about digging them out of this financial hole for a period of time until they can get their sea legs back under them and obtain financing in the marketplace at more reasonable interest rates?
Commissioner Irvin, this is Matt Morin, and Jim might want to step in as well, Jim Idell. But the way I think about that question is ultimately any utility, wholesale provider, public power, vertically integrated investor-owned utility, the cost of credit comes down in two ways. One, when it comes to self-build, obviously that's going to increase the overall cost to the consumer. But two, when it comes to the PPA prices being offered potentially for non-self-build options, you're going to end up with slightly higher bids because of the obviously relatively lower credit worthiness compared to other potential off-takers. That said, there is a plethora of development activity, particularly around the IRA, that has more supply looking for the demand for those PPAs than is generally available U.S. wide. And we're talking, utilities, we're talking state procurements, we're talking GHG type motivations from corporate off-takers. All those kind of enter into a pool where the supply of potential generation development projects far exceeds that demand. And so ultimately it comes down to what that price is to consumer on a levelized cost basis, and the extent which that is impacting it as it relates to Santee Cooper specifically. I would surmise to guess that it has an impact, but the materiality of it is perhaps not as large as it could be if there wasn't excess of supply seeking the cash flow security environment via the PPA.
Thank you for that. Final question I have deals with your knowledge of their current generation capabilities. Have you followed with any interest as it relates to what they say about their future planning? Can you kind of update us on, for example, we have heard that they intend to retire some of the coal-fired facilities What would be your approach to that? Would you take a go slow approach to try to keep it a diversified portfolio? Or would you tell me how you'd approach that question, for example?
If I may, again, this is Matt Morin. You know, we've done a lot of board level work over the last, you know, decade plus as it relates to generation resource portfolios. And ultimately it comes down to least cost, lowest risk to the consumer. And so ultimately we'll have to look at that through a lens of the policy, technology, market uncertainty described earlier as it relates to the utility's existing work, and ultimately come down to a determination in terms of that least cost, lowest risk relative to the energy independence. And if anything has been learned in the last 6 months relative to the, you know, prior 10, 11 years where you had relatively low commodity prices, both on the natural gas and coal side of things, you know, that is increasingly a consideration just as it was in the late 2000s.
And just in a hypothetical situation right now, not considering the dispatchability issue, least cost would mean solar, right?
Well, it's least cost, lowest risk. And so you could see some least cost options along the lines of clean energy supply. But remember, the more intermittent supply that you add to the overall portfolio, you then have a reliability potential ramification as well as resiliency. So in our other resource planning type of work, you know, the more and more long a portfolio gets to intermittent renewable supply, the more you have to consider uplifting the overall target reserve margin, which has its own sort of economic consequences. And so again, within the framework of, you know, the overall legislative mandate in the state of South Carolina, you know, we'll be looking at it again through that economic lens, but knowing it's not just necessarily the cost of energy, the reliability comes into play as well.
Certainly does. And for that reason, wouldn't you consider perhaps storage with solar is one solution? Is that going to be a part of the mix?
It most likely in terms of technology is a consideration, but of course when you put solar and storage together, it has its own, you know, cost impacts. And with the lack of a liquid wholesale market in terms of, you know, you're looking at it more from a localized reliability point of view than, you know, something that you can monetize to the extent, you know, looking to shift from the customer load supply demand imbalances relative to other counterparties. That would be kind of a hindrance to that. But I should also note that we're probably looking at any given time a dozen storage oriented projects, our team collectively of 100. So I mean, we're very much in tune with the question of storage economics and its uses for reliability.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being with us today, and that's all the questions I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. I have a couple of more questions. Probably, Ms. Bilbao, this may be more in your bailiwick because I believe you indicated y'all are projecting 700 hours for the total project. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And what y'all are anticipating is 4 base portfolios or 4 portfolios and 4 sensitivities analysis for each portfolio. Is that correct? Something along those lines?
Yes,
Okay.
That's what we've indicated.
If those assumptions, if what is filed exceeds those 4 portfolios and those 4 base assumptions, do y'all have any kind of chart of hourly pricing that we would have an idea that might, if this project were to be more involved than what you've anticipated, and that there would be increased costs, do you have any kind of hourly pricing scale or matrix that you could share with us, even if you need to provide it under seal?
Yes.
Not publicly on we wouldn't post I can understand not posting a public document with your hourly pricing, but it might help us in evaluating. We've got three bidders. It might help us evaluating individual bids. Could you provide that by Friday with the final conflicts letter? Is that doable?
That's doable. And I mentioned earlier when I took an average of the costs, it was roughly 350 per hour. So that gives a good sort of ballpark perspective, but then we do have the total breakdown and the display of the different consultant levels and who would be responsible for what aspect of the tasks. So it does give a more broader depiction.
Could you also possibly give a scenario, say if there were additional portfolios added, and maybe additional assumptions, a ballpark on like how many extra hours that might be?
Absolutely, we can put
To
that.
consider that. I think that might be helpful. So,
Absolutely.
commissioners, anything further? Thank you and your team for being here with us and also being virtually, for those out there in TV land. We appreciate your patience with us and your responses to our questions. We have delved into this quite deeply, and we certainly appreciate your forthrightness and your patience. So with that, we will close this interview and safe travels back home.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.